So thank you for joining us today. My name is Camila Moore, if you don't know me, and I'm a student of Cranbrook Art Upward Bound. This morning, we have the pleasure of hosting Dana Tai Soon Burgess, acclaimed dancer, choreographer, and cultural ambassador, along with Lila Catelier, curator of public programs at Cranbrook Art Museum for Dance and Conversation on the occasion of Toshiko Takaezu's exhibition, Worlds Within. We're excited to hear about Dana's experiences as an Asian American artist bridging cultures and genres as the founder of the Dana Tai Soon Burgess Dance Company. Lila Catelier is the curator of public programs at Cranbrook Art Museum, here on campus where they develop programming that deepens engagement with an understanding of contemporary art, especially through experimental and interdisciplinary performance. Dana Tai Soon Burgess is a Korean-American choreographer and cultural figure. He has been referred to not only as, quote, he's been referred to as, quote, not only a Washington Prize, but a national dance treasure, end quote, by Pulitzer Prize-winning dance critic Sarah Kaufman. His artistic focus explores intersectional identities as well as issues of belonging and societal acceptance. He specializes in works that bring the visual and performing arts together. He has been a cultural ambassador for the USA Department for over 2 decades, an appointment he uses to promote international cultural dialogue through, quote, the global language of dance, end quote. Throughout his career, Burgess has performed, taught, and choreographed around the world. He founded Dana Tai Soon Burgess Dance Company in 1992, the preeminent modern dance company in the Washington, D.C. region, which is now in its 31st season. His dance company was awarded the Mayor's Arts Award for Excellence in 2005. He has been awarded 3 Fulbright Specialist Awards in Dance for the 2021 Selma Jeanne Cohen Fulbright Lecture Award. He was a prominent feature in the Smithsonian exhibition, A Korean American Century, as part of the Korean American Centennial Celebration in 2003. Dancing the Dream, the Smithsonian's first exhibition on American dance, and he was named the Smithsonian's first ever choreographer in residence in 2016. He's also the author of Chino and the Dance of the Butterfly, a memoir, and the editor and contributor to Milestones in Dance History. Burgess is also the host of SlantPodcast.com, which focuses on Asian American artist journeys. Thank you.
Thank you for that lovely introduction. I'm going to turn it over to Dana to introduce our first dance.
Great. Since we're speaking about dance today, I thought we could just start by watching a dance. So I brought a couple of dancers from the company with me, and it's Felipe Oyarzun Motelo, who's also our assistant director, and Joan Ayap, who's a dancer from the company as well. So they're going to be doing duets, which will be interspersed between our conversation. So that's the format for today. And while you're watching the dances or listening to the conversation, please feel free to formulate your own questions as well, because we'll be taking audience questions towards the end of our talk today.
We're going to start with our conversation, and then we'll move into the dance when we get the audio working. It'll take us just a second to figure that out. We're sorry about the inconvenience. Can we switch to the podium lights? There we go. Now we can see you guys. That's better. Okay. All right. Excellent. Dana, your family has a very special relationship to Cranbrook. Why don't we start by talking about your experience of growing up in Santa Fe and the experience of having this connection to Cranbrook Academy of Art. Thank you, Ms. Gatlin. We'll take it over from the stage.
Thank you. Actually, my parents met here at Cranbrook Academy of Art in the 1950s. So my mom is Korean American, and she was part of 4 Asian American women that came from Hawaii in the 1950s. So one of the women was Toshiko Takaezu that you just saw her exhibition. Another was my mom, Anna Kang, who's still a visual artist today. She's 95 and she still makes art. Another was Alice Kagawa, who was a textile artist. And a third, her name was Ernestine Murai. And the four of them were recruited to come to Cranbrook. They had a common ceramics teacher, and so they came all the way from Hawaii to here. And this is where my mom met my father, who was a painting student. And they would have a lifelong journey in the arts. So my family on my Korean side came to the Hawaiian Islands, specifically Oahu, in 1903 because the Japanese government was overtaking Korea and was shutting it down and would occupy Korea for dozens of years. So what happened was, in order to get out of political persecution, a number of Koreans, a few hundred, were able to get passage to Hawaii. And the way that they did it was that they negotiated with missionaries to get tickets to the Del Monte plantations and other plantations. But what that meant was, when they got to the Hawaiian Islands, they were indentured workers onto the sugarcane and pineapple plantations for generations. So even my mom grew up on the Del Monte plantation, and she didn't wear shoes until high school. She picked pineapples. So for her to be able to escape that generational sort of entrapment, really, of the system of the plantation and get to an art school was a huge transition in our family, because she was the first person to actually get a college degree.
Wait, give me a second. It might work now. There you
Okay, so we're going to... Thank you so much, Dana, for that wonderful information. That's actually a perfect introduction. What you saw, Toshiko Takaezu's World Within, is an exhibition by Toshiko, who Dana was just mentioning. That's the connection between them there. So,
Yeah. So Toshiko was somebody that I knew as a child for my whole life, the ceramics artist whose work you saw upstairs. So ever since I was a little kid, I knew her because she stayed best friends, as did all of those Cranbrook artists throughout their lives. And this particular work is an excerpt or a mini version of a much larger work that was commissioned by the Isamu Noguchi Museum recently. And again, it's Felipe Oidersun Motedo and Joe Nayap will be dancing it for you. So I hope you enjoy this little excerpt.
if we can...
We'll be learning more about the composer of the music, but I wanted to mention that the costumes are designed by one of our resident costume designers, and her name is Sigrid Johannesdottir, and she's actually from Iceland. And we work together on studying Toshiko's slips or the different colors on the ceramics in order to figure out costumes that would emulate her vision.
We'll hear a little from Leilahua Lanzalotti, who is the composer of the music that you heard during that performance, and also the films that were up in the galleries. In conversation with Dana, she's the curator of the exhibition that you saw earlier.
Aloha, I'm Dr. Leilahua Lanzalotti, and I am a curator for Toshiko Takaezu Worlds Within, and also a multimedia artist and composer who's contributed to the exhibition in various ways. One of those ways is by collaborating with the incredible artist who I'm about to talk to today, Dana Tai Soon Burgess. Thank you so much, Dana, for jumping on to talk to me.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you so much. And I just love working with you. So this is a pleasure.
Will you talk a little bit about just your background in coming to choreography itself and how that relates to kind of what the work that you're doing now in storytelling?
Sure. I was actually a competitive martial artist when I was a kid, and then my dad suggested I take a dance class, and I just really fell in love with it. And my parents were visual artists, and they happened to have a very unique relationship with Toshiko Takaezu because they were all best friends since college. They all went to Cranbrook Academy of Art. So I had known Toshiko since I was like a little child and had seen her over the years as I grew up and became familiar with her work and her stories through personal experience.
So cool. And I love that just kind of as we were working together, talking about this piece in some of the intersections, the piece that you ended up using for the choreography was related to something that I wrote from growing up at the Contemporary Museum. And while I didn't have the same experience of knowing Toshiko personally, my mother worked with her, and I felt like I grew up around her works. And growing up around those moons, especially the Mahina, from being a little kid, and the perspectives on some of them and their scale being kind of the same size as me, it's really beautiful to be interacting with them again as an adult, because I still feel they have that presence that feels like it's the same size as me, or there's something about it that feels very physical and very present. And it's really beautiful to be hearing all of the different intersections. I should back up and say, of course, Toshiko Takaezu grew up in Hawaii, and I am from there. She was of Okinawan descent. Her parents migrated after Okinawa had just become part of Japan. It was previously a part of the Ryukyu Kingdom that was annexed to Japan in 1879. And so there were a lot of Okinawans coming to Hawaii. There's a lot of movement there. That's a really interesting history. And indigenous Japanese people then being in Hawaii, and that sense of being in this really interesting mixed community. And so I think that there's all of these really interesting intersections of Toshiko's then influence growing up in Hawaii with the color and the culture and the community and everything that entailed, and also the strong community of that group of folks that all went to college on the continent, on the US mainland, from Hawaii, and the way that influenced their kind of sense of self and really, I think, a search for belonging in this really interesting way. And that's something I love about the piece that you wrote for this, the choreography that you did, landscapes. It feels to me in the interaction of the way that you have pairs of dancers as it's going, that there's this really desire for connection and desire for belonging. And I was wondering if you might talk a little bit about that aspect of the dance and how you chose to pair people, or how you chose to have different groups at different points in the dance.
Absolutely. I think that's one of the fundamental questions that I ask a lot of times in my work is where is a safe place to belong? Where is home? And I think that we're always in search of it. And especially that generation of early Asian Americans who came to the mainland, they were really displaced in a completely different environment. Toshiko and my mom, grew up on plantations. Um, with families that worked the land, that worked on plantations, and all of a sudden coming to the Midwest and the East Coast, it was just a huge transition. And I know that whenever I speak to my mom about that, she said that they always lamented um, not having the warmth all year long, or how cold it got, or how gray it was, what happened to all the green. There was always this sense of missing the land
Hmm.
itself. And I think that when you look at Toshiko's um, works, the land is so prevalent, right? And within your work, I feel like it is a music visualization of not only land but also time, because
Mm.
there's this unique sense of longing that's built in because of a cycle of time that's going on. And I just love that. And I thought it was so apropos to the work itself.
Thank you. Yeah, I really think, and that's something I really relate to a lot in your work too, but just this idea of what does it mean to create space for diaspora or to create
Mhm.
space in this idea of displacement, um,
Totally.
and these different kind of layers of displacement, being in
Mhm.
diaspora and with place, and that kind of allowing ourselves the space to not just have the space to be together and experience a work of art, but
Mhm.
the space to actually be suspended in time together in a space,
Yeah.
which is so beautiful about your work through dance, and that I was hoping that my installation work does, in a sense of actually allowing folks from
Definitely.
the diaspora to actually be in space, feel like they're in space in these landscapes, with these colors that were from the island where Takezu grew up.
Mhm.
And so that was a really, really strong, important thing for me, trying to think about what does it look like to make space? What does it look like for us to be able to gather? And what does that look like when we're not able to do so in our original place of origin?
Mhm.
Um, and I think that thread is one that's interesting throughout Takaezu's life as well, in terms of when she went back to Japan, in terms of her solidarities after World War II, and wanting to have solidarity with Japan. Also, of course, with finding connections with other Asian Americans that were living there, and finding that, and then of course with her connection to Hawaii, and that, and the other um, indigenous art that she looked at with her trips to Santa Fe, with
Mhm.
SAR and some of these other things. And so really looking at all of these different ways that she was trying to find connection, that I find really beautiful. And then having that physicality come out in your work is so, so moving and really, really gorgeous. Um,
Oh, thank
I wonder
you.
if you could talk a little bit more about the your biography that's so gorgeous, and
Sure.
how much really, even though it's not about Takaezu, that she's so present in the work as this part
Mhm.
of kind of center with your parents, and what that meant to have folks out of your immediate circle and your family that were
Mhm.
other strong artists in your community, in terms of thinking about what was possible for yourself, or having those kind of that precedent of someone who was out there doing it, not just your parents, or if that's something you
No,
think about.
yeah, it's so interesting how all of those memories very much still resonate. And especially now seeing the exhibition and being able to work with your beautiful score and to choreograph a tribute to Toshiko, it's even made me think more about that very special community of Asian American artists that always stayed in contact. And when I was growing up, I was privy to so many conversations, whether it was with Toshiko and my parents, or Alice Kagawa, or Isamu Noguchi, or his sister Ilis, that were not always easy conversations, and maybe not even conversations that kids should be listening to, but ultimately they were very informative, because they were about the trials and tribulations of their careers, of their creative processes, and about how the world was perceiving them as Asian Americans.
Right, right. And I think that we hear that so much also in Noguchi's biography, but in these different things of trying to find where do we belong, how do we find connection. That's so true for, folks that are Hapa. I'm Hapa also, kind of mixed
Yes.
Chinese
Mhm.
and Hawaiian and many things,
Mhm.
but trying to find each other in this in-between space. What does it mean, like even if you hold a U.S. passport, to feel like you're, what does it mean to have that U.S. passport and feel othered at the same time? What are these
Mhm.
different things that are the in-between, and how do we find a sense of belonging, or how do we find a sense of camaraderie in this in-between space where we feel sometimes like we don't belong in either community. We
Mhm.
don't feel like we fit in certain ways, and how do we find each other and have space to. I think it's important for young people to hear those conversations and hear that people are thinking about it and trying to work through it, and find what it
Mhm.
means to actually kind of build community and build supportive community and a space of generosity and a space of real genuine support, when it feels like the surrounding culture is not necessarily supporting that. So I think that's really, really
Right.
important.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you so much, Dana. It's really just a joy to experience your work in so many ways, and a joy to read about
Oh,
your
thank
life and your
you.
process. And I really, really appreciate getting to say hello again. And I hope I'll be in person with you again soon.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Thank you to Dana, sort of doing double duty in the room and on screen. Dr. Lanzalotti would have joined us live, but it's 4 a.m. in Hawaii right now, so we pre-recorded that part of the conversation. Can we get a little round of applause if that idea resonated to you? Do we feel like we're building that kind of supportive community at Hub in the time that we spend together over the summer and on our Saturdays here? Yeah. Thank you, Carla. Okay, thank you so much for that part of the conversation, Dana. I think that does such a wonderful job sort of building in the layers of all of the things that are imbued within your work. Let's restart at Santa Fe with your growing up experience.
Because my parents were both visual artists, they actually, after graduation, sort of moved across the country, did different art teaching and directing jobs, and then landed in Santa Fe, New Mexico, and that's where I grew up. And Santa Fe is known as an artist colony and has a long history from the Transcendentalist painting time period to Stieglitz and Georgia O'Keeffe. It's always had this sort of like colony that would come from the East Coast and settle there. But I grew up in Santa Fe before it was a chic Ralph Lauren Santa Fe style, and it was before it hit the runways. So when I grew up there, it was a very small town that was predominantly an indigenous community, the Diné or the Navajo, and the Hopi, and then it was a Latino community that had moved there all the way back to the conquistadors from the 1500s, and those families were still very, very present in Santa Fe. And then there was this outside sort of artist community that had moved in, and I was part of this small Asian American community that was there. So that's really like how I grew up. And I went to bilingual schools in the day, public schools, and they were bilingual in Spanish and English. And then in the evenings, I would go to martial arts classes because all of the kids who were Asian American went to this one specific dojo in Santa Fe that was run by this Japanese man. So he was kind of like the Mr. Miyagi, if you can think of that, from like the Karate Kid, like totally that guy. And so we really appreciated him. But what I learned very early on is that within all of these very different cultural beliefs about the land, about religion, about language, what language should be used, for instance, to communicate. The one thing that ended up being a universal for me would be movement. And when I was very young, it was martial arts. And when I was introduced to dance, the first dance class I took, I just knew that that was going to be my art form, because it had the discipline of martial arts, it had the movement of martial arts, but it had the creativity that I was looking for. And that's how my journey to dance occurred. And I think that my whole life, I've felt that movement is a universal language. People all over the world dance. And we know when somebody is elated, when they're excited, when they're happy, when somebody's feeling sad, when somebody's feeling bored. We just organically and inherently understand the language of movement.
At such an interesting point, the language of movement goes all around the world, and so much of your career has been sort of based around international arts diplomacy. You've represented the U.S. through dance in countries as diverse as Peru, Pakistan, Suriname, Cambodia, Jordan, Mongolia. How have those experiences influenced your work, and what does it mean to you to be a sort of ambassador for dance?
It happened very serendipitously. I was performing at the Kennedy Center, and this individual came backstage and made it through security and said, would you be interested in being sent to Venezuela next week? And I thought, who is this person and how did they get back here? Anyhow, and he gave me a card and it said State Department. And I didn't know that there was actually a touring roster for the State Department, but I called, talked to a couple friends. I was like, what is this? And my first assignment was to go to Venezuela and work with a dance company and a university there that was going through this major transition. And since then, what I really felt from even that first trip was that I'm not coming to this country as this American artist that's going to show you what Americans do, but I was coming to the country in terms of trying to understand what a Venezuelan artist does and to just engage in conversation and collaboration. And I've always looked at diplomacy as friendship building, and the best diplomacy, especially through artists, which I think are a huge part of diplomacy, we call it soft diplomacy, is friendship building and having long-term friendships specifically that lead to artistic exchanges throughout the years. And I've had really some amazing experiences all over the world, and I'm still do, so I'm very thankful for that.
It's really wonderful to hear about building relationships with people in other places. We feel like things are so different in other places, but actually they're in some ways quite similar when we think about sort of what makes us the uniqueness of humanity. Something that is also really important to your work, and to bring you back to where we are today, the Art Museum. So many times your work is not just presented in theaters, but also in museums. Can we talk about the influence of visual art and dance in your aesthetic?
Sure. Because I grew up with visual artists, I grew up really in the midst of a lot of creative processes, like seeing my parents paint or weave or make ceramics, and so it just made sense that when I became a dancer and then a choreographer, that I would have some association to the visual arts communities and specifically to museums. So living in Washington, D.C., we have the Smithsonian institution, and the Smithsonian is not just one museum, but it's actually a conglomeration of museums and learning institutions or centers. There are over 130 of them. And all of these allow for free visits to the museum. And I really immersed in that, and I was very, very excited about it. And very quickly started to build relationships with different curators in order to present my work there. And after a few years, the director of the National Portrait Gallery contacted me and said, we'd like to try and create a whole new position, and we're going to call it the choreographer in residence for the Smithsonian. And so they created this position for me that I did for 7 years, and was able to do projects through all the Smithsonian, and I still continue to do that. But I have now left that official role and moved through multiple museums across the U.S. So this corner photo up here is the Noguchi Museum in Queens. This is the University of New Mexico Art Museum. This is National Portrait Gallery. And this is a private museum, the Krieger Museum. That was a Moreau project. And what I love about working within museums is that you can build audiences that are interested in these different aesthetics. Like a visual arts person is interested in dance. A dance person is interested in visual arts, and we usually have live music as well. So it creates this whole synergy of new audiences. And I think that's really important at this moment when, if you go to a traditional dance performance or opera performance or even a theater performance, often you look out into the crowd and you see this sort of ocean of blue hair, and you start to think, oh my gosh, in 5 years from now, there's not going to be an audience just because they're not going to be alive, right? And so we have to start building our inroads into all of these different communities again. And I think one of the almost failures of a lot of these institutions has been, up until this time, the siloing out of, this is where you paint, this is where you do textiles, this is where you dance, this is where you do theater. And there are a lot of conversations about intercollaboration or conversations about multidisciplinarity, but the reality is that the structures themselves aren't built for that. So now is a time to really create projects that break down those silos again.
Just like this one.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So that's a perfect segue to the next dance, Hyphen, which is also a collaboration with an artist. Let's hear about it.
So Hyphen is a work for 10 dancers. We'll see 2 dancers today, but Hyphen references that in-between place between Asian and American, African and American, Latino and American, Irish and American, German and American. It's this in-between place within our identities that at times is a connector to our place within the American canon, and at other times feels uncomfortable and is a disconnector. So when you watch the dancers in this abstract dance, think about sort of identity frustration. And we'll see a little bit of the video that accompanies the work. And they are some of Nam June Pak's earliest videos. His nephew has allowed me to use Nam June Pak's videos when I would like to with our dances. And what is great about Nam Jun's work is that, especially these are his earliest videos, and they are also self-studies as well, and Nam June Pak being the originator of video art. So here are Felipe and Joan once again.
When you and Layla Hua were speaking earlier, you talked a little bit about your biography and the book. I'd love to hear about the experience of writing for you.
For me, writing is very much like choreographing, because with choreography, you have an idea, you have a theme, you explore that, then you create a movement phrase, which is like an initial sentence or a voice, and then you build that out. And in writing, that becomes a chapter, which then becomes a section. And you have you're trying to build a strong beginning, middle, and end, and have different symbols. And that's the same way that you build out choreography. It's very, very similar.
And what do you think about the development of your choreography in the future? What do you think is next for you?
I'm working on a new piece about, well, and it's not about, but it's inspired by Helen Frankenthaler's a new exhibit that is happening in the Southwest, and that'll go up in June. And then after that, a new work for a new performing arts center that's opening in Albuquerque, which is based on the intersection of Rudolfo Anaya, who's a Hispanic writer, Georgia O'Keeffe, and Ilis Gilmore, who was Isamu Noguchi's half-sister, and they all lived within New Mexico. So that particular work is in a much larger scale. It's a little more operatic. So anyhow, those are the next projects that I'm working on, aside from our normal touring and performances and season that we do. Yeah.
And that normal season, let's talk a little bit about that. I know that you work with a lot of youth, and you're based at the Kennedy Center, which is sort of this amazing theater in Washington, D.C. Can you talk a little bit more about what sort of the operations of the company look like?
Sure. We actually do a Kennedy Center season. We do now Woolly Mammoth is a theater company that's based in the heart of Chinatown. We have a relationship with them, so we do a season there. We tour, so we'll be at like the Ailey Theaters in January. And as I said, we'll be in the Southwest later in the year. Then we'll be in Peru by summer. And we have a educational program which is really based in a school that's very similar to Cranbrook in a way. And we, or I shouldn't say we, but our dance teachers serve over 1,300, 500 classes per year in dance. So we have a big educational component as well as the performance component.
Yeah, so it's more, almost as many guests as we see every year in the museum, the number of people that you guys are working with every year. So that's really incredible to hear about. It's so exciting to hear from someone who is, such a leader in their field and such a professional in their craft. So it's been really, really wonderful to talk to you. I think we probably need to take a few minutes to introduce the tribute to Marian Anderson and the background for that, so that we have some time for them to prepare for it. But so let's talk about the dance.
So the next dance that you'll see is a duet. It's an excerpt again from a larger piece entitled A Tribute to Marian Anderson. And this was commissioned by the National Portrait Gallery a few years ago. Marian Anderson, of course, is a civil rights icon. She was a counter alto who had this incredible voice. She was an operatic singer who built her career in Europe predominantly, and then came to America on several tours. And unfortunately, when she was in Washington, D.C., she was going to perform at Constitution Hall, and the Daughters of the American Revolution, because she was African American, would not let her perform there. And so President Roosevelt and his wife said, we are going to create a concert for Marian Anderson outdoors on the steps of the Washington Monument, because this whole situation is occurring and this is incorrect. So what's amazing about this galvanizing moment in history is that if she had just done a concert in Constitution Hall, she would have sang for, a few thousand people. But when she went to the steps of the Lincoln Memorial, over 100,000 people showed up. Then it was broadcast live. So you had several 100,000 more people that heard her sing in this very inspirational way. And so she became the voice of the civil rights movement. So this particular dance that you'll see and the whole tribute to Marian Anderson that I created, all of the music is from her her playbook, or from what she used to sing in Europe. And this is specifically a Brahms work that you'll hear one of the opera singers that we work with, who usually plays live, perform.
And after this dance, we'll take questions from the audience with Felipe and Joan. They'll join us for the questions.
So here are Felipe and Joan for their last dance.
Wonderful. Okay, I think that there is a microphone that could circulate in the audience. Sam, if we could come out and do that. Amazing. Who has the first question for us?
Test, test.
I enjoyed that a lot. And my question is, how many people are in your company?
Yes, there are 10 dancers at all times, and usually 12 because we have 2 understudies at all times. And then we have our designers. So we have people that design props, set pieces, lighting design, costume design, and production design is a huge part of what we do since we're in theaters and museum spaces.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, my second question is, what martial arts did you learn?
I learned karate, specifically from, it's called Masoyama. It's a specific school in Tokyo. And what's cool about that form is he was a displaced Korean living in Japan, so his initial form was sort of more like Taekwondo, which uses a lot of legs. So this particular form uses equally legs and arms and fists, so upper body and lower body. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi. Oh. Hi,
Hello.
my name is Zenglor. My question is, for the first piece, what exactly made the sound in the background?
Oh, that's a great question. So Toshiko has these pots that you saw a couple of them upstairs that are actually rattles. So when you move them, they have almost like a rain stick sound. If you've ever seen those sticks that you can turn upside down, they have pebbles in them. So that was making the sound.
So many of the works that you saw upstairs are called closed forms. That's what she calls them. And the way that she makes them is she puts pieces of ceramic wrapped in paper inside of the pot while it's still wet. And then once they're fired, the paper burns away and the pieces are left to make those rattles. So Toshiko imagined that each of her pots was a world that she could gaze into, and those sort of pieces of the rattle were kind of the planets within each universe that was held within those pots. Let's give another round of applause to Felipe and Joan, who have joined us. Thank you so much for coming out onto the stage. It was so wonderful to see you dance. Could you each just tell us a little bit about yourselves before we take questions for you?
Hi, I'm Joan. I was born in Washington, D.C., but I grew up in the Philippines, and I've been dancing with Dana for 7-8 years now.
Hi, everybody. I'm Felipe. I was born in Chile, and I've been dancing with the company for 13 years now.
Does anyone have any questions for Felipe or Joan?
My question to them is, what inspired you guys to become dancers, and like, what do you feel in the moment of doing the dances?
That's a great question. Thank you. I think I was always, so without going into too much detail, I had a very chronic asthma when I was a kid, so I couldn't move much. And I always wanted to move, like I could not sit still. Even this, like to me, is a little hard. And I always thought that words were not enough to say something, you know, like that I could get my thoughts across with them. And growing up in Chile, it was hard to become a dancer because there was this social stigma of what like a dancer is, right? Like, or how much salary you will get, or like any other social stigma that is around the arts or dance for a guy. But I begged my parents, right, to like let me do traditional dance. That's how I started, folkloric dance. And that was it. Like I got hooked in that moment. And then I just enjoyed it. And I think like the same feeling that I had in that first class and that first performance doing traditional dance still until today, which is like, I feel like I can be anyone. You know, like I can be anybody. I can be somebody that is loving, somebody that is like angry. I can be my full self with any emotions, any feelings. All my is there, and I can share it with everyone in a safe space. You know.
Thank you.
So for me, who has older siblings here? Yeah. So, oh, look at that. Well, like babies or maybe middle child. Well, for me, it's all started with my older sister. So when she was a teenager, she started dancing ballet, and unbeknownst to me that it will become something more to just being able to dance with my sister. So I'll be dancing at the side of the stage when I was 3 years old because I wanted to be like my sister, you know? We always want to be like that older siblings. So that's how I started. But then after that, just like, I feel like with Felipe, you know, it became something more than just the dancing itself, but it became an extension of my language. So it's another way for me to be able to express myself than just speaking. And I hate public speaking. So I will always tell myself, like, I'd rather dance.
You're doing great.
Oh, thank you so much for that reassurance. I'd rather dance, or maybe if we have singers in this room, you'd rather sing than to speak, or you'd rather write songs than to speak in public. And for me, it's the dance that gives me more voice. And then I tried different genres from classical ballet to hip hop. Then I did pep squad, you know, like gymnastics, like woo. And then now I'm doing modern dance. And so it has different, it opens up a lot of opportunities for me as a person trying to find their voice, and most especially as an artist.
Thank you.
I'll just say quickly that we're also really excited. Joan is about to start her master's studies in cultural preservation, and she's going to focus on dance. So I think that we have time for one more question. I'd love for it to be someone who hasn't asked a question yet. Yes, there we go.
Hi.
Oh,
This is hi. This question's for the dancers and Deanna. How has dancing affected you as a person, growing slowly?
Dina?
I can do it very short because we want to give more time for other questions too. I think kind of an extension of what I just said, right? Like I think dance allowed me to feel full, you know, like allowed me to feel like myself and create community. Dance has this beautiful thing about creating community that even if you don't want to, you are interacting with others. Even now, right? Like we all becoming friends, right? Through speaking and through you watching us being vulnerable. So I think that's kind of the beautiful thing for me.
Yeah. And intrinsically, dance connected a lot of communities. You know, we'd be dancing in gathering. It started as a prayer, a tribute to the divine entity. And now we still do it. Like in parties, we get to meet people through that. And we just get to enjoy being ourselves and being with the people that we enjoy spending time with.
And I think for me, like dance and creating dances allows me to find a sense of healing, right? And to share stories with audiences so that we can try and find a shared understanding of each other's perspectives. You know, I think that there are just a few fundamental stories in the human experience, like stories of love, stories of betrayal, stories of redemption. You know, we all recognize them. And I really enjoy exploring those things and trying to figure out how to present them to an audience.
Okay, it sounded like we had just 2 more questions. Let's take them.
There is.
There's
we'll
one
go here and here. Yeah.
Okay.
Here and here. Yeah.
We'll get you last.
Put a question over here.
Um, this question's for the dancers. I want to ask, like, how did y'all learn to dance without actual music? Like the first one, it was like it sounded like rocks or something like that. So like, how did y'all learn to dance with that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, they're all great, but I think there is two parts I feel to that. One is that dance is a kinesthetic experience, right? So you don't necessarily need the music, right? You can, body language happens naturally, right? And so music informs, like the first one, right? Music to me informs more of it's a soundscape more. Like it creates the environment in which I inhabit in that moment, more than the last piece that is much more about like the emotion and like the sort of this ominous and at the same time passionate moment that is happening in stage, right? And then the second part to that is that John and I have been dancing together for 12 years. We have been dance partners now. So and we are also almost like brother and sister. So we can dance together in any music and we'll understand what the other person is saying because we know how we speak without words. It's like when you are with your best friend, right? And you just can sit and look at each other and you start laughing because you know what you're thinking, right? It's the same, but with movement. So, yeah.
Yeah, and that's a very good observation. Same thing, just like what Felipe was saying, it's a kinesthetic experience. Almost like when you're doing something and you started humming. There's not really any music, but then you started creating this rhythm within yourself. But because it's soundscape, same thing. You're just feeling that, oh, it's like it sounds like a raindrops. And we communicated through our body language. And just like what Felipe said, just like you feel each other. So that's how we were able to find our rhythm within the music.
And sorry, just one more thing. We have performed these sets of duets this week. Like, I think this is our 5th time that we have doing it. And none of them have been the same. Because we're always open to listen to what the other one is proposing. Although the choreography is set, there are some legroom there for us to, again, to have this conversation live. Because if it is like completely set and it loses something that Dana really values, which is the authenticity, right? And the thought process behind the movement. So if you see it 5 times, you will always see something new in a way.
My final question is, when you're doing those and like, if there's a person in the stands or something doing something, how do you train yourself not to laugh?
We do laugh. I think, again, I thank you for that question. Do you want to answer first? Okay. I think laughing is, again, part of the human experience reaction, like authentic reaction of one has. And I think when you become, what separates, I think, a professional from a pre-professional or a student is that you morph that energy, right, that you want to laugh like really hard into physicality and emotion, right? So we can hear what you're saying, like what you all are saying while we're dancing, or we can see your faces, right? And not only you, but like in most of our performances, even in big theaters, we can see at least the first 2 rows. And you can, like sometimes you want to laugh really hard for something that happened, right, in the audience, of something that happens within the person that you're dancing. But you use that energy into like fuel, right? Like that is sort of like the feedback between both parts.
It's either that or sometimes you troubleshoot. You started thinking about any sad stories that you may have experienced. So that helps just to kind of ground you back into the performance. Or most of the time, you actually get into your own element. You zone out when you perform. You forget what is happening. And then you started focusing on the emotionality of what you're experiencing on stage because you're feeling vulnerable. But because we're humans, it's just that as professionals, you train yourself or you get used on how to manage those human experience that we experience in real time. But that had happened like numerous times.
As a choreographer, I could immediately tell something about this audience because when we started out, you had such amazing patience and offered the dancers such wonderful dignity when we had this technical glitch. And I thought to myself, this is a really smart and thoughtful and caring audience and group of people. So I just want to thank you because, your questions were fabulous, your insights, and you're just very thoughtful. And I feel that energy and I want to thank you.
Let's have a round of applause for everyone in the room.
Thank you.
Thank you to Dana Tai Soon Burgess. Thank you to Joan Ayab. Thank you to Felipe Motaro. Thank you all for being here and for giving us your time and attention. I hope you remember to come back to the Art Museum whenever you'd like to see the artwork. So now I'm going to release you. I think you guys are going to go to lunch. So we're going to exit the auditorium and we're going to go. Oh, yep. I'm turning it over. Miss Gatlin, it's Miss Gatlin's turn.